can go on. First of all, to Henrik. Well, I think you just painted out the challenge we have, and I'm not going to start giving you a deep analysis of it, but definitely if we can't answer your question, we're going to have a very tough election in the spring, and then we're going to end up with the ones who are just focusing on the problem, actually both setting the agenda and easily also winning the election without having a solution to the problem. And that is what I fear the most, that the ones who don't even want a solution, a constructive solution to the problem, will win the election, because the ones who want a solution don't dare to present it. And this will be an interesting aspect of the spring election. Concerning your question, just on the unemployment issue, personally, at least, I don't believe that the unemployment as such is the biggest reason for that. It's not inflation, even though we have, as you mentioned, seen a development. In my view, it's mainly because of wages, for instance, in our country, rising far faster than our actual competitiveness. And that is not I don't think the euro is actually an issue here. We have a lot of domestic issues in many of the countries that are now losing in competitiveness that are others than the euro, and I think we would have seen this development without the euro because of strong exports, because of a belief in that our products will still sell at this price in the future, not taking into account the fact that globalization brought about a competition that we hadn't counted on, the fact that our wages have risen far too much in many European countries. And I wouldn't actually go so far that I would blame not the central bank, not the currency. I'm sure we would have had this development without those two factors. Because we can see that this development actually started, for instance, in Finland already in the late 90s, and most things imply that we would be more or less in the same position as we are right now, even though we wouldn't have joined the euro. So we could discuss for a long time why we have unemployment. There are many other factors too, and of course the currency can be also one of the factors, but I don't see it as the main factor at all.
The only thing what I want to add is that what I see is that that there is an enormous amount of money have been created in Europe, but has not been transferred to society, to real economy. All the LTROs, for example, that the LTRO 1, LTRO 2, eventual an LTRO 3, where we are talking about for the moment. Not to talk about the bonds bought by the European Central Bank, certainly in the beginning of the crisis. My point is that all this is an enormous amount of money, but that has not been transferred to the real economy. And the real reason I already indicated for that is the lack of confidence. Banks keeping their money, not lending to each other, not lending certainly not to the real economy. And we have to solve that, and the only way to solve it is finally to have, in my opinion, this banking union and then a huge recapitalization of the European banking sector. That's also what happened in Japan. Japan, when they started with their crisis, there is a lot of things to learn about the Japanese crisis, because what we are seeing today is not a unique thing. It happened already in the past. The Japanese crisis started at the end of the 80s with the real estate crisis. Exactly, the real estate crisis, because at that moment, 1 square meter in the center of Tokyo was completely crazy, impossible to pay for. Then this crisis started in the beginning of the 90s, and you can remember that self. Before the 90s, every week there was a book published about the Japanese miracle. Well, books like that, Japanese miracle. After the 90s, there was never one book published about the Japanese miracle. It didn't exist any longer. And this crisis that started in the 90s went on for 30 years until 2003. Finally, there was an agreement in Japanese society to recapitalize Japanese banks. And they did it for $500 billion of dollars. And then there was a slight improvement of the situation. And now there is a little bit more improvement also the last years. My fear is that if we, first of all, don't tackle the banking issue, we cannot recover in Europe. And another example is the Swedish example, but in a positive sense. The Swedish have got also a crisis in the 90s, a huge crisis, and they, first of all nationalization, then recapitalization of banks, they emerged very rapidly. They went out of that crisis on a very short-term basis. Why? Because they tackled the banking problem from the beginning, from the first day on. That's also the reason why the Americans, for the moment, have again a good 3% economic growth, because they used that money there. I forget now the name of the minister, the Paulson plan, I think, or it was. In any way, they used immediately the $700 billion who were available in the beginning to recapitalize banks and insurance companies. And so that's the thing to do. And for the moment, that can still take years, as I see the speed that we are using to have a resolution fund, for example. And the resolution fund is a basic element, a building block for the solution of that problem.